The comment period varies by the type of regulation that's issued, and it varies and is up to the discretion of the agencies. But typically, comment periods are anywhere from 30 to 180 days, depending on the scope of the regulation proposed. So while many of the WIOA implementation regulations will be included, I think it is still unclear whether or not the measure on employer engagement will be included. That measure in the law was actually given, the department has 2 years to implement, so they may not necessarily come up with the draft regulation this far out. If you could move to the next slide. So once the Departments of Labor, Education, and Health and Human Services have issued the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking, National Skills Coalition is planning to submit comments to those draft rules, and we'll publish them to our website and distribute them broadly. Our comments will largely be grounded in the 4 priorities that we have identified for WIOA implementation, which Brooke will speak about in just a moment. But really, I'd like to emphasize that agencies need to hear from a wide range of stakeholders. So even if National Skills Coalition's priorities are reflective of your organization's priorities as well, it's certainly important for all of the agencies to get input from a diverse set of stakeholders and really get a good sense of what the field is looking for in those regulations. So there will be, there have been opportunities through the WIOA regional town halls that have been held over the past couple of months. There were also some webinars in the beginning of the year. The Department of Education is still accepting comments on its WIOA blog, and there will be an opportunity to publicly comment formally on the regulations come January. Next slide. And then just briefly, these are a few key dates that will be good to keep in mind going forward. So January 18th, 2015, the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. July 1st, 2015, the WIOA provisions take effect. March 3rd, 2016, the Unified Plans are due. And then, as I said, 2 years from the signing of WIOA, the Departments of Education and Labor are required to publish the final employer engagement measure. And I'll also note briefly, and I know Brooke will talk about this well, for states that are early implementers, those state plans are actually due in March of 2015 for a July 1st, 2015 start date. And with that, I'll turn it over to Brooke.
Well, actually, this is Brian again. So I'm going to start this part, and then Brooke will be continuing. Our playbook for creating effective state plans covers the planning process, plan structure and format, cross-agency data and measurement, sector partnerships, career pathways, and job-driven investments. Turning to the next slide, I think folks can see from our theme about realizing innovation and opportunity that we see WIOA as having great potential. However, there's no guarantee that potential will be realized. It's something that must be achieved. We see the state plan as possibly being a tool. It can be a tool for realizing innovation and opportunity. But to do that likely will mean going beyond meeting the minimum federal planning requirements. It'll mean going beyond requirements, going beyond compliance, and creating the plan that the state and advocates truly want. Next slide. So to begin with the planning process, the key here is broad and authentic stakeholder engagement. The stakeholders for WIOA are broad. It includes the state program administrators for every program, not only for the 6 core programs in WIOA, but all the programs that a state will be covering in its state plans. That could be far, and we hope far beyond the 6 core programs of WIOA. It includes business representatives, labor representatives, local boards and their staff, community-based organizations, and local providers for each program. So local providers of adult ed, voc rehab, career and technical education, which hopefully will also be covered in the state plan, and the providers for other programs as well. In order to have opportunity for all those stakeholders to participate in developing the state plan, there'll need to be many different opportunities through multiple methods, including such things as work groups, forums, surveys, focus groups, social media, and the in-person methods taking place at multiple locations within the state. And the stakeholders should have an opportunity to comment on more than one set of draft language. So we're going to have 3 poll questions during this webinar. And the first one of these is around engagement. And we would like folks to go to their laptop and answer the question of, does your state plan to have broad, meaningful stakeholder participation in the state planning process? Please select one of those 5 response options. And I'd like to get a sense of how people are feeling across the nation in terms of what the opportunity is likely to be for stakeholder engagement. Okay, do we have the responses here? Okay, so interesting. Well, about half the folks don't know. That could well reflect that their state hasn't begun yet. Quarters say definitely, and quarters say probably. Good thing, only really a small minority would say probably not or definitely not at this point. So that's encouraging. Okay, now going back, I want to talk about the question of early implementation. WIOA in the Act itself says that the departments have to provide the opportunity for early implementation. The departments have not indicated much about that yet. We expect that early implementers will have to submit their plans as early as the beginning of March of 2015 and begin implementation then on July 1st of 2015. When WIOA came into being, the Department of Labor allowed states to have the opportunity to choose to early implement parts of the Act and to go with the regular implementation date for other parts. We do not know yet if the Departments of Labor and Education will do that similarly for WIOA. In thinking about whether or not your state should be an early implementer, it's really a question of balance that only, of course, the state can decide for itself. Will there be time for broad and authentic engagement? Will there be time to create the plan the state truly wants? This has to be balanced against what may be seen as the likely benefits of early implementers, early implementation, not only getting started early, but when WIOA was enacted, the Department of Labor used the early implementer states to provide advice to them on the final regulations. So the early implementer states did have extra influence on how the final regs came out. So here's our second poll question we'd like to ask folks. At this point, is your state planning on being an early implementer of WIOA? Just through anecdotal information, we've heard of about 10 states that are looking at it. We'd like to get a sense in this poll question, a broader idea of how many states are planning on doing this. Okay, can we see what the results are here? Okay, only 2% say definitely, 13% probably, 25% is probably not or definitely not, and again, the majority don't know. So it's too early to say. Okay, thank you. Turning to plan structure and format, the plan will have both strategic and operational elements. It must provide a vision of a skilled workforce that meets employer needs, and we think a vision that closes the middle skill gap as part of that vision. We feel that it should be broad in scope, whether a state chooses to submit a unified or a combined plan. that it should cover not only the 6 core programs, but other programs as well, such as career and technical education, supplemental nutrition assistance program employment training, or SNAP-ENT, TANF. The broader the scope, the better able the plan will be to guide the workforce development in the state. The unified plan is the minimum requirement, a plan that covers the 6 core programs of WIOA. But there is also the option to submit a formal combined plan that would meet the planning requirements for other federally funded programs. At this point, we do not know what the federal requirements will be for a combined plan. We will be providing additional recommendations as those requirements become clearer. And we certainly hope that the combined plan provides a viable opportunity for states to offer a very broad plan that meets federal requirements. But in any event, the state plan is an opportunity to be very broad in the state's vision. It should also be fairly specific. It should be actionable. It should cover in the operational elements the who, what, and when of the action steps that the state will take, the programmatic steps that will enable the vision to be achieved. Without such specificity, it's difficult for agencies and others to know what they're supposed to do to implement the plan. It's also more challenging to hold folks accountable for what they're supposed to do to implement the plan. So our third poll question, turning to that, is your state planning on submitting a combined state plan? A combined state plan that goes beyond WIOA. Definitely, probably not, definitely not, or don't know. Okay, can we see the results on that? And again, a clear majority don't know at this point. 6% say that their state definitely is planning on submitting a combined state plan. 6% out of the 22% that do know or have a sense at this point. Okay, continuing on. So turning to sort of more the substance of the plans, we feel that the state plans are opportunities to advance 4 priority strategies for workforce development. The strategies of cross-agency data measurement, sector partnerships, and career pathways, and job-driven investments. The first of these strategies around cross-agency data measurement has the next slide there. WIOA provides, the state plan provides an opportunity for states to lay out their plan for a comprehensive unified data and performance measurement system across workforce development. And there are a half dozen elements that we think are key to achieve this. The first of these is supply and demand reports, that the state analyzes what is the supply of trained workers broken down by occupational groups, by levels of education and training, and how does that compare to demand? The number of job openings that employers have for individuals trained in the occupations. And where are the gaps? The state plan should indicate where are the gaps in the state's economy, the skill gaps, or if there aren't state supply and demand reports yet, it should indicate what is the state's plan to create supply and demand reports that analyze where the skill gaps are in the state. Common metrics. One of the main advances of WIOA is the establishment of common metrics for the 6 core programs in WIOA. These will be very useful. However, it is possible for states to go beyond the 6 core programs, whether or not the state has a combined plan or a unified plan. The state can indicate in its plan that we'll be extending the common metrics of WIOA to cover other programs, such as career and technical education, SNAP-ENT, and TANF. Having common metrics greatly facilitates planning, coordination, and shared accountability. And the broader the common metrics are applied, the greater these things will be achieved. Dashboards. Dashboards show in a fairly simple, straightforward way the results of the programs and of the system using common metrics. They facilitate policymaker understanding of the system's performance and, again, help facilitate planning and coordination and shared accountability across the programs. The state plan is an opportunity for the states to show the dashboards they have, for those states that have them, and for those states that do not yet have dashboards to talk about how they plan to create dashboards in the coming years. Turning to the next slide, measuring credentials. One of the other advances in WIOA is bringing back a credential attainment measure. This will help incentivize more skill training in the achievement of credentials by program participants. The counting of credentials should be broad. It should not only include the traditional programs of higher education, but it should include other programs, credentials produced no matter how they're produced. It should include certifications and licensures in addition to certificates and degrees. Recognizing, though, that this is challenging, many states aren't going to be in a position yet to indicate how they measure this broad array of credentials. But the plan will be an opportunity to indicate how the state plans on being able to measure the broad array of credentials, including certifications and licensures. Scorecards for students and workers. WIOA provides that states are to offer consumer scorecards that indicate what are the results of training programs, at least for the eligible training providers. And these scorecards should be for all students and for all providers. Again, this is going to be a major challenge for many states. Those states that have been able to achieve this, to provide scorecards for all providers, for all students, have a very active state role, where the state basically collects the seed records from the training providers, ensure that those records are matched with UI wage records and other administrative records in order to then compute on a uniform basis what are the outcomes of the training providers' programs of study. And then the state feeds that information back to the providers and to the local workforce boards. It's a very involved process, one which will be a challenge that states that haven't engaged in this for them to achieve it. Under WIOA, it is to be achieved by just over a year from now, by the end of 2015. And then finally, on cross-agency data and measurement, unified and comprehensive data linking. There is going to be a lot of linking of data records with UI wage records and with other administrative records. States should be described in their state plan an efficient and effective way to link data, a way that is not duplicative across the system. And that includes interstate linking of records, including the use of the wage record interchange system 2, RIS2, that enables states to link with the records of UI wage records in other states. So those are the 6 main elements around cross-agency data and measurement. Again, for those states that have these elements in place, the state plan should describe what the state is doing. For those states that do not have these elements in place, the plan is an opportunity to describe how the state will put these elements into place. And now I'd like to turn it over to Brooke.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to cover the areas of sector partnerships, career pathways, and job-driven investments, and just spend a little time talking about how state plans can really be a playbook for advancing those strategies under WIOA. So starting with sector partnerships. Under WIOA, state plans must describe how employers will be engaged, and one of the ways to engage employers clearly is through sector partnerships. Local workforce boards must use adult and dislocated worker funds to develop, convene, or implement sector partnerships. So with that in mind, we feel that it's important for a state plan to describe the key elements of sector partnerships that it will support. And you can see that I have 6 listed here. These are major elements of any sector partnership, so I'll just go through each one quickly. One is target sectors. It's important for state plans to either discuss priority industry sectors across the state, or recognizing that there may be regional differences in regional economies, to provide some guidance to local areas on how they can go about identifying target sectors that have opportunities for growth and opportunities in the labor market in their region. The second important area for sector partnerships is partners. So WIOA lists several types of stakeholders that can participate in sector partnerships. And state plans themselves can actually provide guidance on roles that different partners can play, different activities that certain types of partners, whether they're business, education, or training providers, might be able to play when they're involved in a sector partnership. We do think it's important for states to encourage partnerships to be inclusive so that there's not a duplication of effort in a particular regional industry partnership. The next area is around intermediaries. So there are a variety of organizations that can and that do play a convener role in sector partnerships throughout the country. Some state plans, existing state plans, provide guidance on how intermediaries can be identified at the local level, and that's something that state plans can continue to do under WIOA. And we do want to underscore the importance for there to be some flexibility there, because there may be effective conveners that already exist, particularly because sector partnerships have been used in the field already, and there may be some variation in the type of entity that best serves as a convener from one region to the next, depending on their regional partnership and the industry that they're targeting. The next area is around targeted populations. We think it's important for state plans to underscore that while sector partnerships can serve a variety of workers, it's important for sector partnerships to advance employment of low-income adults and youth. And so thinking about how those populations fit into a sector partnership strategy is important as state plans are developed. Activities, state plans can describe the types of activities that they would like to see sector partnerships engage in, and these can include things like skill gap analyses, setting skill standards and setting certifications, developing shared training programs, and thinking about a regular way to engage employers. While it's helpful to have guidance on these types of activities, we don't think that state plans should be overly prescriptive, again, since partnerships will have different needs depending on their industry and region. And then the final area in terms of a partnership element is around outcomes. So we think it's important for state plans to think about how they might use WIOA core indicators and other types of measures to assess their sector partnerships. And we also think it's important to think about outcomes that could be measured for workers as well as for employers, since sector partnerships have that dual customer focus. Next slide, please. So in addition to those types of critical elements of sector partnerships, we think it's important for state plans to describe what the state will do to support sector partnerships. Now, support can come in the form of training and technical assistance. For example, there are some state plans that describe technical assistance such as toolkits, sector academies and institutes, and peer learning opportunities that the state provides on an ongoing basis for regional sector partnerships. There's other types of support that can come in terms of funding, and so we think that state plans should describe what funding sources they will use to support the planning, convening, and implementation of local sector partnerships. I want to note that states can use WIOA Title I state set-aside funds for this purpose, and some states also use their own state funds to help fund sector partnerships. Other states do also look at philanthropic foundations and at local governments as sources of funding. Next slide, please. Okay, so that was sector partnerships. Another key strategy that is promoted by WIOA is career pathways. Under WIOA, a state plan has to describe how state programs will support career pathways, and state and local boards are in fact tasked with developing career pathways. So given that career pathways often involve multiple stakeholders, we think it's important for the state plan to describe how state programs are going to collaborate with each other, with local programs, and with other stakeholders to really create career pathways. There's a few ways that state plans can do this. They can articulate a common career pathway strategy and then discuss the roles that different partners will have in implementing that strategy. They can describe particular policies, MOUs, articulation agreements, and funding that they're going to use to support pathways across different agencies and programs. And finally, getting back to the data piece, they can discuss the plan for using data and cross-agency measurements and how that data and those measurements can be used to really facilitate and assess career pathways. The second piece under career pathways is in regard to effective adult education approaches. So career pathways include programs that often provide basic education, or ESL, concurrently or within the context of workforce preparation and skills training. They often also use strategies that accelerate an individual's education and career advancement. And these can include strategies like integrated programs, bridge programs, vocational ESL, and dual enrollment. So we feel that it's important for a state plan to talk about how these effective adult education approaches will be deployed as part of the career pathway plan, how they'll be administered and funded, and how they'll help individuals of different skill levels. Another critical component of career pathways has to do with wraparound support services. So support services like transportation and childcare are really critical to reducing barriers that may prevent low-income individuals from persisting in career pathways. And counseling and career guidance is important not only to connect individuals to those types of support services, but also to help career pathway participants transition from one step of the pathway to the next. And so we think it's important for a state plan to describe the types of support services and counseling that will be made available to career pathway participants and what agencies will be responsible for providing those support services. Another area of support that helps with career pathways is financial aid. And so we think state plans can address the financial resources that will be made available to career pathway participants to pursue education and training, with a particular focus on part-time students, working students, or students who are starting on a non-credit basis. And then the final area in regard to career pathways is around their relationship to sector partnerships. So state plans, we think, should explain how career pathways will really relate to the sector partnership strategy that's also discussed in the state plan. Under WIOA, career pathways are supposed to align with the skill needs of industries in the state or region. And we think that states can achieve that alignment by thinking about how to use sector partnerships to inform career pathways. Next slide, please. So the final area I want to touch on is in regard to job-driven investments. WIOA state plans must include an analysis of both employers' and workers' skill needs. And as Brian mentioned, these types of analyses can be used to identify skill gaps. In addition to identifying skill gaps, we think that these analyses can be used to guide state investments in education and training to close that skill gap. And it's important for plans to discuss those particular job-driven investments that they will make targeted at closing the skills gap. WIOA has a new emphasis on training that's directly connected to jobs, and this includes things like incumbent worker training, on-the-job training, apprenticeship, and other types of work-based learning. And by definition, sector partnerships and career pathways are also job-driven training. So it's important for state plans to explain how this type of training will be part of the strategy to close the skill gap overall. So that's a quick overview of how state plans can be used to promote those three strategies. As Brian mentioned, we provide examples in the report that's available on our website of existing and current state plans that cover all of those different strategies and pieces that I've discussed. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Brian to introduce the next speaker.
Thank you, Brooke. our final speaker will be Amy Wallace. Amy's the Assistant Director for Workforce Innovation at the California Workforce Investment Board. Amy? So, Amy, we cannot hear you. Perhaps your phone is muted.
How's that?
Now we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. Very, very good. Technical difficulties. 2 mutes. Thank you guys so much for having me on this call. I really appreciated all the information that was already provided, and I'm happy to talk a little bit about how California is thinking about WIOA and really in the context of our previous state planning process, which we're hoping to build on. And before I realized that panelists couldn't respond to the 3 really fascinating questions that you asked, I thought, well, for California, we're also in the I don't know or probably category for many of those questions. Like other states, we're in the process of sorting through our options and figuring out our direction. But in general, we're really excited about the opportunity that WIOA gives to us to really accelerate innovation and change in the workforce system across the country. So if you could just run to the first slide, thank you so much. So I just wanted to start off with talking about sort of how we're thinking about the future of workforce development here in California. And I think, you know, this is probably true for most states across the country. We have some pretty significant challenges in California in terms of labor market and jobs. We have a very diverse population that moves around a lot. Work is changing. More people are working part-time and contract jobs. And folks don't stay with a single employer for their lifetime, so they need skills to be able to be mobile and nimble in the labor market. We're seeing more and more technology-based solutions that employers are using in terms of their hiring practices. But for many folks who may not have access to technology or who are have been left out of the workforce system before, some of these tools are challenging to use. And frankly, just the scale of need in our workforce system continues to grow exponentially. So these are just some of the things that we are thinking about as kind of the context for our state plan, both our current plan and our plan for our new WIOA plan. But we really are trying to see this as an opportunity for innovation and change in the workforce system. And I won't go through these opportunities in any detail, but suffice it to say, you know, we really feel that, you know, California and the workforce system here is at a crossroads, and we have an opportunity, a window of opportunity to figure out what our workforce system needs to look like, not just 2 years down the line, but really 5 and 10 years down the line, and how do we create a nimble, responsive system that's able to adapt to changes and challenges as they emerge. So next slide, please. So we have a pretty diverse workforce system here. We have, in the state of California, 49 local workforce investment boards, all focused on a whole host of service delivery and convening strategies. We have 112 community colleges. You can see almost 500 K-12 career academies, and just many, many other both community-based and Department of Education and community college-led career and workforce development efforts. As with all local workforce investment board areas, you know, services are primarily driven locally based on those workforce investment board jurisdictions, but we know that workers and employers don't necessarily adhere to those political jurisdictions in terms of how they're looking for either jobs or where employers are looking for workers. So we have some sort of barriers around system integration and collaboration that just have to do with the way that we have set up our system that we're working to manage. And one of our sort of tenets in thinking about our workforce system is that we really need to incentivize and reward the kind of cross-system coordination and integration that we've been asking for many years with WIOA, and that I think there's even more opportunity to get to with WIOA. But I think it's for California, we're coming from the approach of it's not enough just to sort of mandate and regulate that. We really need to walk the walk as well as talk the talk and provide the kinds of resources and incentives to get people working together because we know that's difficult and we know it costs money. So we want to be very mindful of that. So the next slide, please. So we actually, California developed a 5-year strategic plan two years ago where we actually had laid out many of the strategies that are now called for in WIOA. So in many respects, we feel that feels great, that we're on the right track, and WIOA will give us some additional parameters and some additional leverage to move those strategies forward even farther. But in our current state plan, our 4 sort of key tenets are the ones listed on the slide there. So we are very focused currently on regionalism. As you can imagine, with 49 local workforce investment boards, so many community college and K-12 programs, we really needed a way to organize regionally around labor market demand and commute patterns and those kinds of things. So in our last state plan, we actually asked folks to identify some regional planning and alignment opportunities beyond the local workforce boards. We've also have a focus on sector strategies in our current local plan. We actually did labor market analysis statewide and defined 3 priority sectors for the state of California. They are healthcare, advanced manufacturing, and energy-related construction, and what formerly was sort of green jobs, but kind of clean energy and clean jobs as our 3 primary sectors. And we have created a very big focus in our current state plan on training. So we set out a set of activities to be coordinated across the various stakeholder groups that provide training and access to training resources to focus on credential attainment in those priority sectors that the state has laid out, but also in sectors that emerged from the local and regional planning process. So we haven't limited training priorities to just those set out by the state. We really left flexibility up to the local workforce investment boards to define their priority sectors and where they wanted to target their training dollars and their partners' training resources in areas of high demand. And finally, in our current state plan, we also put a big emphasis on career pathways and really making sure that our systems had a plan in place to adequately step workers up a career ladder to move from entry-level employment to careers that lead to self-sufficiency level wages, and primarily in growing or high-demand industries. The way we did this is we kind of took a twofold approach. The state put together an interagency team that included representatives from the state workforce board, obviously, but also the community college system and leaders there, the state's Department of Education and adult education systems, as well as our Employment Development Department and State Labor Agency, and our Health and Human Services Agency that oversees the TANF and what we call CalWorks program here, so the employment services that are specific to folks on public assistance. Those folks actually came together for an extended planning process and worked through the details of the plan, what each of their agencies' priorities were, ensuring that those were incorporated into the plan, and that there was cross-agency agreement at a high level on the direction of the state plan. And that was a process that took probably about almost a year to complete. At the same time, we did a series of stakeholder meetings in regions across the state of California where we actually worked with local workforce board leadership, but also their partners to identify areas of need, get input into the state planning process and content, as well as feedback as we were developing strategies on what should and should not be in that state plan. So it was a really extensive stakeholder engagement process. Again, took almost a year to complete, and frankly required almost all of the resources of the state board dedicated to that effort, that planning effort. So the next slide. So how are we getting there? So I'm just going to go through this quickly. So the way that this is actualized in the state plan are kind of around these three areas. So with system integration, which is, the idea of bringing together partners in a real meaningful way, we've actually kept that high-level interagency state team who is involved in the planning process. We've kept convening those folks as what we call the state working group. Those folks meet every 2 months to talk about, how from a tactical and strategic point of view, we're making progress on the various elements of the state plan. We troubleshoot with each other. We figure out how to use our various funding sources, particularly those that are going out in competitive solicitations and grant processes, to reinforce each of our respective roles, but also to be pushing forward on the goals and the vision of the state plan. And that's been a really effective mechanism for working the plan as we move forward. We're also closely aligning with our state-level economic development agency that's involved in business attraction and retention for the state of California, making sure that we're aligning businesses that are coming in or we're enticing to come into California, as well as those that we want to make sure have all of the resources in terms of a skilled workforce to stay and grow in the state, that we're aligned there to make sure that we have a full package of opportunities available for both workers and employers. And we have actually started the process of developing a workforce cross-agency scorecard that actually at a state level identifies credential attainment or program completion for those programs that don't offer credentials necessarily, as well as income increases across a 5-year period of time. In terms of continuous improvement, we have crafted a set of additional performance measures on top of what WIOA at the time was asking for. Those are specific to the Workforce Investment Board system. They did include credential attainment, so we're happy that that is being reinforced in WIOA. We've also created a process for designating what we call high-performing workforce investment boards. So those boards who are really going sort of above and beyond the call of duty in terms of coordinating at the regional and local level, making sure that they're really closely aligning the supply and demand within their local area, and that their service delivery strategies are at a very high level, are designated as high-performing boards through a process that occurs every 2 years. And we have also crafted in our state planning process an ETPL performance requirement. So all providers on the eligible training provider list are required to meet a certain placement threshold of graduates of their programs, as well as be providing training in those priority industry sectors that I mentioned the local areas are charged with. And then finally, on industry alignment, for the three committees that we, for the 3 sectors that we have identified, we actually instituted subcommittees of the state board to focus very specifically on the needs of those industries and how we match up our training and workforce development activities with those. So I'll go to the next slide. Okay, great. So what we see as the opportunity with WIOA is really to take our current plan and our current planning process that we went through a couple of years ago to kind of the next level. So we are very interested in creating a statewide vision and set of goals that crosses even more stakeholders and partners. As you know, WIOA both mandates and suggests a broader set of agencies to be at the table in that planning process, and so we're really looking forward to sort of expanding our table as well. We're also going to focus, while our past plan focused on high-level goals and outcomes and general strategies, we intend that the next plan focus more carefully on tactics, how we're spending our money, and making sure that those metrics are actually transparent so that we know that we're making progress collectively as a state. And finally, we're really thinking of this, our region that California is a part of, Region 6 for DOL, has framed this as a year of experimentation. So what we're really looking to do is to look for areas where we can innovate and transform the system while we have some flexibility for the next year as we're moving through the planning process. Next slide. So how we're planning, and as I said, this is all sort of the plan for the plan right now. We're still in the decision-making process. But in terms of developing our new plan, we are actually going to be refocusing the work of our state board to focus very specifically on WIOA planning and implementation, and as a part of that, skill development and credential attainment, and making those 2 explicit activities of our state board and their committees. We are looking at coordinating at the state, regional, and local levels. Previously, folks were talking a little bit about the need for skill gap analyses and really robust labor market information that's called for in WIOA. Our labor market information division is actually in the process of crafting regional labor market analyses that include skill gap analyses that will be available for folks to use in the regional and local planning process. And we're really looking to put more emphasis on the regional planning process and a little less emphasis on the local planning process. While we know that all service delivery is locally driven, we want to make sure that the planning and the context of that is really regional. We are continuing to create additional cross-system metrics and balancing flexibility with accountability. So focusing less in this planning process on the process for getting to your end goal and more on real adherence and discipline around performance and metrics that are regionally defined. And finally, we are likely not going to be an early implementation state, but we want to take sort of a hybrid approach. So as I said, we had actually, in our last planning process, moved forward on many of the tenets that are now embedded into WIOA, So in places that are more ready to take on the regional planning process sooner rather than later, we want to incentivize and encourage that, but we are likely not going to take an early implementation approach across the board. And then the last slide, this is just quickly where we hope to get ultimately. And these are our high-level goals around sort of improving the match between workers and employers and doing that at a regional level, creating new models of workforce system service delivery, increasing and leveraging greater investments, and again, developing a workforce system that is able to respond to changes and needs now and in the future.
Okay, thank you, Amy. I'm afraid that we have run up against our allotted time. We will be posting this webinar on our website, and you will see our contact information in the next slide, which will be on our website. And if you have any questions regarding anything that we've covered today or is in the report itself, please feel free to contact us. So with that, I'd like to thank the panelists and the audience for taking part in today's webinar. Thank you.